It's a pleasure to talk about unlocking the power of research data management plans, mainly concentrating on best practice and the benefits. So this week, the whole world is celebrating the International Open Access Week with the theme Community over Commercialization. So as a way of talking about data management plans, if we look at the open science movement and the issue of open access, we are now dwelling more on open data, whereby we are no longer worried about the final research output, but we are also worried about how researchers manage to get that research output at the end of the day. So we are saying that community over commercialization, we are now worried about what can benefit the research community instead of just thinking about the issue of monetizing what we are doing as researchers. So as an introduction, I will start with two famous quotes, one by Benjamin Franklin, who said, by failing to plan, you are preparing to fail. And Winston Churchill pointed out that he who fails to plan is planning to fail. So as researchers, as we'll be doing our research projects, we are mandated to plan on how we manage our research data instead of just waiting and then see the processes unvolve, but we should plan so that we don't fail at the end of the research project. So here we are saying that as we are doing research, we'll be generating a wealth of data, and without proper planning, the data will be underutilized, or it will be lost, or it will be inaccessible. So data management plans, they represent a key solution to the challenge of underutilizing, losing, or failing to access the research data. And then these data management plans, they are not just mere administrative formalities, but if we look at it, they are strategic documents that outline the research data lifecycle, because we are now worried about managing our research data from inception up to the end of the project, where we are talking about research impact and research assessment. And then these data management plans are the gatekeepers of data integrity, data security, data discoverability, and data accessibility. So we are saying they are the compass that guide the researcher throughout the intricate maze of data management by ensuring that the data is harnessed to its maximum value. So here we are highlighting the role of data management plans in enhancing research reproducibility, transparency, and collaboration. Why is it that we are worried about research data management planning? If we look at it, research data management, it deals with collecting, caring for, using, preserving, and sharing the data. Because if we look at it, we are saying now we should be concerned about how those findings were drawn, how those conclusions were drawn. So we should manage the research data from the day that we thought of a research project. And some funder requirements, they say that when you are applying for a grant, they will say that we need a data management plan. So by doing research data management, you are fulfilling funding grant requirements. And some publishers, as you are writing your manuscript, you now want to submit it for publication. Some publishers will say, where is the research data that led to this publication? So you'll be fulfilling publisher requirements. And the issue of integrity and replication, there were some issues whereby we're saying some researchers were cooking data and then come out with publications, while they didn't go into the field and do the actual research. So when we are talking about research integrity, we are saying that if we are able to manage our research data, we will be able to showcase where we managed to draw our findings and conclusions. And then we also enhance data security and minimize data loss. There was an issue whereby a PhD student had managed to go into the field, collected the data, and then the data was just on his machine, and then the machine was stolen. That person didn't manage to do any backup, and he lost everything before data analysis. So you can imagine how that student felt. He had done all the data collection, but before data analysis, the machine was stolen. So he was not able to do the data analysis, and he had to go back to the field to do the data collection again. So just imagine losing all your data after doing that hard work, how frustrating it is. So if you manage your research data, you'll be able to ensure that there is data security and you minimize the loss of that data. And then we also deal with the prevention of duplication throughout the reuse of data. If you look at it in some cases, let's say you have been funded to do a research on how to enhance research data management in institutions of higher learning. I've managed to get the grant, I go into the field, I collect the data, and then I come with it. And then another researcher wants to do the same research process. Just because I haven't managed to publish, that researcher is not aware that this process was done before. So we are saying that that person will go back into the field and do the same process that I've done. So it is a way of preventing the duplication of the research process, the same research process. I manage my data. If I publish my data, that person will just be able to come, utilize that same data, and then draw other conclusions in line with his research objective, instead of utilizing funds, be it institutional funds or funds from other grant organizations, taking, for example, NRIF, to do the same research that have been done by someone else. So we are saying by doing research data management, you'll be preventing duplication through the reuse of the data that have been collected. And then the issue of research data management also protects the institution from reputational, financial, and legal risks. Sometimes there might be some publications that are controversial, which might be have legal or financial obligations to the institution. So if the research data is available, the researcher will just say, I've drawn this conclusion from this research data, and then it will protect the institution from the legal risks. And then we are saying research data management starts with data management planning, which is the topic of today. And then let's briefly look at the FAIR principles. The FAIR principles are the main issue of research data management and the issue of open science, as it were, because we are saying the data should be findable, the data should be accessible, the data should be interoperable, and the data should be reusable. That's the main principle of the FAIR principle. How can we make the data findable? The data and the material can be enriched with metadata that is assigned with a unique identifier. The unique identifier is a persistent identifier that uniquely identifies that research data. Taking, for example, if we look at DOIs, they are embedded to a manuscript or a research data set that will uniquely identify that manuscript. If we're talking of authors, we have the ORCID, which uniquely identify you as an author. Taking, for example, there are 5 Jocelyn Chigwada. This Jocelyn Chigwada will be uniquely identified by my ORCID. So here we are saying for data sets, they can have a DOI which uniquely identify that data set. And the data set should be accessible. How can it be accessible? The data and the metadata should be stored in a trusted repository with an open and free protocol, which is accessible by both machines and human. Metadata here, we are saying this is just the data about the data. Taking, for example, it should be a guide to a researcher who wants maybe to look at your research. They start by looking at the metadata. Is it mainly the title, the keywords, and where the data is stored, so that they'll be able to access it. And then the data should be interoperable as well. This is done by utilizing vocabularies and public domain ontologies, so that the metadata will be referencing and linking to the data set. And then reusable, we are saying that there is need for additional documentation and protocols describing the acquisition of the data, the licenses, with a detailed provenance, so that the user who would want to use to reuse the data set will be able to know how the data was collected, where was it collected, the methodology used, and the license of that data. In this case, we are talking about open licensing, because you can't reuse something that is closed. And then the RDM policies. Why are we worried about these policies? We are saying that we should have these policies to ensure that we govern the management of research data throughout the research life cycle. And the policies also ensure that all research data generated at the university are managed and curated effectively and efficiently, utilizing the FAIR principles. And then the RDM policy, it doesn't work in a vacuum, but it works in conjunction with other related policies, such as the IT policies, the collection development policies, and other policies that deal with research within the institution. And as I was doing my research, I managed to find out that Unisa have got a research data management policy that is available on the URL that is provided under research support. Now we go to the data management plan. What is a data management plan? This plan is a structured document that describes what data will be collected, what data will be used in the course of the research project. And then it also documents how the data will be managed on a day-to-day basis and how relevant data will be preserved long-term, and then how that data will be reused after the publication of the findings or at the end of the research project. So it's like a structured document that I said that one should always be available to ensure that you know that you are coming from this point to that point until the research process is over. And then why data management plan? If you look at it, this plan, it helps to organize your data collection. As a researcher, sometimes you'll be utilizing so many data collection instruments. You are using interviews, you are using questionnaires, you are going to do an observation, maybe you are going into the lab and do some experiments. So this plan will be pointing to you that you are collecting your data this way, this way, this way. If it is a multiple method, you are starting with the qualitative data and then go on to the quantitative data. So it's like a guide that helps you as a researcher to organize how you collect your data. And then the DMP also, it allows your data to be found and understood when it is needed. Taking, for example, someone else, you have done your research, you are done. Someone else wants to know how you collected your data. By just looking at your data management plan, that researcher should be able to pinpoint that this researcher have done A, B, C, D in order to collect the data, and it should be understood by someone who was not part of the project team in the event that the person wants to reuse that data. And then also the data or the notes are less likely to be missing when it comes to processing and analyzing the results. You are able to draw all the data that you have collected within your research project, so that as you be analyzing your data, you know that I've done the experiments, I've done the questionnaires, I've done the interviews, I've managed to collect this data, I'm now analyzing it. It is to get the results that I want to draw my conclusion and recommendations for my study. And then in the event that some staff leave, just imagine you have got a very brilliant research project that you are doing, and then the principal investigator left the organization, and then the fund for the grant was provided by the institution. And the institutional policy, let's say, is state that when someone leaves the organization, that person shouldn't be part of the research project. So just imagine the principal investigator leaves the organization. What will the project team do? So if there is a data management plan, there is continuity of the project after someone left or after some researchers join the research project. It is easier to follow that these research projects, we are going to collect data from A, B, C, D. And then also you deal with the unnecessary duplication, that is recollecting or reworking data that is already available. You can be able to utilize the funds effectively by avoiding going back to the field to collect the data that have already been collected. And then there is the issue of permission and ownership, mainly dealing with the issue of intellectual property rights. This one will be pointed out within the DMP, that this institution is the owner of this data, or the permissions that are allowed for this data are A, B, C, D. Thus, that information will be available in the data management plan. And then the data underlying publications are maintained, allowing for validation of results. Taking, for example, maybe there were some issues in terms of the research output. The researcher will be able to point out the DMP and say, this is the data that I've collected, and this is how I managed to come to these conclusions. So it's a plus for both the researcher and the institution. And also, data can be found if it is needed for sharing. Remember, under the FAIR principles, I talked about the issue of reusability of the data. If the data is to be reusable, it means that when the DMP is available, that data can be found for sharing. And then the data is also available if needed for legal issues. Remember, there are some controversial topics that the researchers might be undertaking. And then if there are any legal issues that need to be addressed, the DMP will be like the documents that assist in dealing with those challenges. And then as I was looking at the Unisa RDM policy, section number 6 deals with data management plan, whereby 6.1 is saying that researchers in receipt of grant funding may be required to develop a data management plan, and all researchers are encouraged to do so in accordance with good practice. Here, good practice, it means that they should comply to the FAIR principles. And then 6.2 is stating that grant holders and the research groups are obliged to declare their practice related to data in a data management plan to be submitted for assessment with a grant application, meaning that if you're applying for a grant, you should develop your DMP, and then that DMP should be submitted together with the grant application. And the university, the Research Administration Department, takes responsibility for quality assurance and monitoring the execution of the data management plan. So here we are saying that as you develop your DMP, it is quality assured by the Research Administration Department, and it's also monitored for execution. If you say that you are going to do a BCD, this department will be monitoring whether you are complying to what you indicated within your DMP. And then 6.4 says, it is acknowledged that some data generated are more sensitive than others. Before initiating the research, it is the researcher's responsibility to consider the following: confidentiality, ethics, security, and copyright. So there are some sensitive data that might be collected. So within that DMP, the researcher should point out that I will collect sensitive data, and this sensitive data will be confidential. No one will be able to access it except the research project team, and how the security will be ensured throughout the research life cycle. And then at the end, sometimes it might be under an embargo, and then after a certain period, that data will be open access. And then 6.5 says, possible data sharing challenges should be considered in the data management plan with solutions to optimizing data sharing. So if there are any sharing challenges that might be available within the research that you'll be doing, that might be articulated in the DMP. And then 6.6, it states that the data management plan should indicate which data will be shared. If some research data is to be restricted, an appropriate statement in the DMP and subsequent publication should explain why access to data is restricted. Taking, for example, just like what 6.4 is saying, some data is very sensitive. It shouldn't be shared unless if there are issues that will be ironed out before that data is shared. And then 6.7 is saying reporting against the DMP should be included as part of the annual and final report of the research project. So as you'll be doing your project reports, ensure that you are also reporting about what you have articulated in the DMP. And then compliance in data sharing activities may be considered as part of the selection process for future funding proposals. So here we are saying that Unisa deals with the issue of DMP within the research data management policy. And as researchers, we should be aware of this as we'll be developing our proposals for funding from the institution. And then now, how do we develop a DMP? I will talk about DMP tools. There are quite a number of them. There are many, but for this talk, I will indicate only 3. The DMP Online, which is hosted by the Digital Curation Center, and the DMP2, which is hosted by the University of California, and the South Africa DMP2, which is hosted by Unisa. I will start with the DCC DMP2, the one by the Digital Curation Center. This one, it is a web-based tool that supports researchers in developing data management and sharing plans. And it contains the latest funder templates and best practice guidelines to support users in creating good quality data management plan. So as you be using the website, you will find out that there are quite a number of templates from different funders that are available on the DMP Online too, that can be utilized to develop data management plans so that you'll be able to meet the funder requirements. And within those data management plans, you can also browse. There are some public DMPs that have been published on the website just to guide you as a researcher on what to expect when you are developing a data management plan. And then the service is free, whether you are a member or you are not. The service is available for free at the point of use for researchers to develop data management plans, regardless of whether their institution or a funder is a customer. So anyone is a can utilize this DMP online by the Digital Curation Center. So I managed to get a screenshot of the landing page. When you are open the website, you can sign in if you've got an account, or you can create an account, and then from the website you'll be able to see the public data management plans that are available. And there's also a template that can guide you step by step on how to develop your own data management plan. That is a living document that you can use throughout the research life cycle. And then the DMP2. This one is also a free open source online application that helps researchers create data management plans. And it provides a click-through wizard for creating a DMP that complies with funder requirements. It means these templates are tried and tested. You can utilize them to create your data management plan. And it has also direct links to funder websites that can help you to answer questions that you might have in terms of data management best practice resources. And this one is a resource of the California Digital Library, a division of the University of California. So this one is the landing page of DMP2, whereby you can sign in or you can sign up, and then you'll be able to be guided. It's not difficult to use. It guides you the information that is needed when you are developing your data management plan. We'll look at that later on. And then our own local tool, we have the South Africa Data Management Planning tool. This one, which is hosted by Unisa, and it can be used to create and share data management plans that meet funder requirements. And then this one was developed and provided by the Data Intensive Research Initiative of South Africa, which is DIRISA. So this one is the landing tool for the DMP2, whereby you can also sign up or you can sign in if you already have an account, and it guides you in terms of the components that you should include in your data management plan. And then at the end, you submit your DMP, which you will be utilizing throughout the research life cycle. And then we now move on to the components of a data management plan. What is it that should be a part of the DMP? If we look at it, different funding agencies, they follow their own format for data management planning. So in the event that you are applying for a grant, taking, for example, it's a national or international grant, look at the call for the grants and then find out what is it that they look forward to when you are developing your data management plan. Sometimes they give you a template. Use this template when you are developing your data management plan, be it the DCC DMP online or the DMP2 or the SA DMP2. It will guide you. Make sure you understand what the funder requirements are in terms of developing a data management plan and follow that. So that you'll be able to get a higher chance of getting the grant. But if we look at it, there are 5 basic elements that should be considered in every data management plan. 1, describing the research data, so that when you are done with your research, other people will be able to find it. And then the data standards and the metadata. The data storage and access, how we are going to store your data, and then how others are going to access your data, and how the research project team will also be able to access the data. And then the issue of intellectual property and reuse. How are you going to deal with IPR issues? How are you going to deal with the issue of reuse? Are other researchers going to be able to access your data? And then the issue of publishing data and data preservation. Are you going to publish your data in a data repository? How are you going to ensure that the data set is published? And then how are you going to ensure that there is long-term preservation of the data set at the end of the research project? I will start with the issue of data collection. Here we are looking at 2 main issues. What data will you collect or create, and how will the data be collected or create? In terms of the what data, we are looking at the type of the data set, the format of the data, the volume of the data. If we look at it now, because of big data, some researchers are working with big data, and at the end, there's need to ensure that your big data will be able to be accommodated within the data repository of the repository that you say that you are going to archive your data. Even active data, you should ensure that the data repository is able to accommodate your data. And then do your chosen format or software enable sharing at the end? and long-term access to the data. We are saying that we are archiving this data mainly for reuse, especially to avoid the issue of duplication of research. So are you saying that this format will be able to be preserved long-term? Will it still be accessible? There was a video that I came across whereby a researcher was asking the PI about their data set. And then the PI said, "Oh no, the data is within my software. I've saved the data on a disk, and the disk is in a box. The box, I can't locate it because we shifted." And then the PI went back to the house, tried to look for the data, finally got it, and then gave the disk to the researcher who was asking for the data. After the researcher managed to get that data set, she went to the office, tried to access that data. That data was not accessible because there was a special software that was needed in order to access that data. Went back to the PI, and then the PI said, "Unfortunately, I had a core PI who had migrated to China, and that person is the one who knew how to use that software. Unfortunately, I can't assist you." So now you see, we are saying that the data set, finally, it was managed to be found, but it's not accessible. So here we are saying that, are there any software that are used that will allow the perpetual access of that data set? And then, are there any existing data that can be reused within the data sets that you'll be working with? And then, how will the data be collected or created? We are saying that you should point out the standards or a methodology you will be used to collect that data, and the structure and the name of your folders and the files when you are collecting that data, and trying to organize it within the process of data collection. Make sure that within the files that you are using, they'll be easy to interpret, they'll be easy to read. There shouldn't be long file names, but there should be some logic within the file naming system that you use as you be saving your data sets. And then the issue of handling the versioning. Let's say you have collected this data, but there are some elements that were added to the data. How will you handle the issue of versioning? If we look at the data repository that is used, the Figshare one. The Figshare one, it allows to have different versions. If you add something on top of the data, there will be a different version which is different from that, but the previous version will be available as well, so that the information won't be lost. So here within your DMP, you should articulate how will you handle the issue of versioning. And then the issue of quality assurance. How will you adopt quality assuring your data to ensure that it is good, and then it points out to the FAIR principles as well, to ensure that it will be findable, it will be accessible, it will be interoperable, and it will be reusable. So those issues, when you look at data collection, you should point out what data are you going to collect, which format. Are you going to use the electronic format, whereby maybe you develop some questionnaires using Google Forms and then you sent to users? Or are you going to use the paper format, whereby you print your forms and the questionnaires and you distribute to the respondents? This is to ensure that you are able to move along with your data collection process, and ensure that at the end, those will be able to, other researchers will be able to access your research data. And how will you collect that data? This information should be available within your data management plan. And then we go on to documentation and metadata. Here we are saying you should point out what information is needed for the data to be read and interpreted in the future. You should do this in line with taking other researchers into consideration. Let's say you are the one who is accessing the data that has been collected by another researcher. So as you be developing your data management plan, ensure that you include all the information that is necessary for your data to be understandable, so that when another researcher wants to reuse your data, that person will be able to understand your data without getting in touch with you. So here we are saying that get into the shoes of other researchers. After you are done with your research project, you are done with your data collection, you are done with everything that you have managed to do, your data is available sitting in a data repository somewhere. Are other researchers able to understand it just by looking at the information that you have provided? So get into the shoes of other researchers to ensure that all the information that is necessary is available, the documentation is available, so that when I come, I wasn't part of the project team, but as I be accessing your data set, I'll be able to understand, read, and interpret it. And then I should indicate how you will capture or create this documentation and metadata. This will enable the other researchers to understand your data set as well. And then you also look at what metadata standards will you use and why. Why is it that you choose this? The ones that mostly used is the Dublin Core, whereby we are saying the main concepts of the data set should be available. The title, the author, the how the data was collected, the format. These are the main issues that should be documented as you be writing the metadata. Use a metadata standard. Which one did you use and why do you want to use that one? Should be available within the documentation and metadata section. And then we go on to the ethics and legal compliance. As we'll be dealing with that with data, remember when I started, I said data is the research is now creating a wealth of data. Quite a huge amounts of data are being created as people are doing the research. So there's need to comply with the ethics and legal issues surrounding the use of data. So you need to take into cognizance how will you manage any ethical issues arising from the use of your data, and how will you manage copyright and intellectual property right issues as you be using your research data. Remember, all these issues, you are documenting them before you start your research project. We're saying that research data management, it starts with data management planning. You are planning how you will be able to deal with the issue of ethics and the legal compliance within the research process. So here you need to understand how you gain consent for data preservation and sharing. Remember, we are saying that because of the issue of clearance, you should seek consent from the respondents and from the participants, so that you'll be able to ensure that what you have written within your concept note, your consent note, is what you are going to abide to. So if you are saying to the participants or the respondents, I'm going to share this data at the end of the project, be sure that you manage to deal with those issues after the research project, because in some cases, some researchers go into the field, they say to the participants, this is just for academic purposes only, it's very confidential, we are not going to divulge the data after their research. Make sure you comply to that. But now, because we are talking about open science, we are talking about open access, we are talking about open data, we are encouraging researchers to share their research data. So as you be compiling your consent form, ensure that you are clear that you are going to share the research data in a data set. So this DMP should indicate how you gained consent for data preservation and sharing. Are you going to say that participants will sign this form to ensure that they are giving me permission as a researcher to share the data at the end? And then you should be documenting how you protect the identity of the participants if required. Remember the issue of anonymization. Sometimes you'll be dealing with health information, for example. You can't divulge that Jocelyn is HIV positive when you are dealing with doing a research on the maybe participants who are HIV positive or something. You can't divulge that this participant is HIV positive. So you might anonymize the data. So you should document here how you are going to deal with the identity of the protecting the identity of the participants, so that you don't breach the consent agreement that you have done before collecting the data. And then you also should document how will sensitive data be handled to ensure that it is stored and transferred securely. The issue of security. In some cases, if it is a machine, we'll be talking about the issue of passwords. Getting into the machine, and also passwords getting into the folder. And then the issue of backup here. We are saying that also the issue of security comes into play. How are you going to ensure that if you are transferring the data to another location, will it be safe? I will ensure that there won't be any data loss. There won't be any theft that might happen in between. So here we are saying that you should ensure that sensitive data is handled securely. And then in terms of IPR issues, you need to document who owns the data. If you look at it, this is articulated in the RDM policies. Some institutions say that the institution is the owner of the data if the research was done whilst you are a member of an institution. And then some grant funders, they'll say that the funder is the owner of the data if the research was funded by an external grant funder. So be sure on the contents of the RDM policy so that you act accordingly to what the policy states. Sometimes the principal investigator and the research project team are the owner of the data, but if it was collected under an institution, some institutions stipulate that the institution is the owner of the data. So ensure that within the DMP, you indicate who owns the data. And then how will the data be licensed for reuse? In some cases, we ensure that reuse is only applicable if there is an open license, CC BY license. That's when someone will be able to reuse it. But if it is restricted, not for commercial use, not for what, some researchers won't be able to reuse that data. So ensure that you point out how will the data be licensed for reuse within the DMP. In most cases, it's a CC BY. And then are there any restrictions on the reuse of third-party data? You should ensure that you include that information within the DMP. And then will data sharing be postponed, restricted to publish or seek patents? In some cases, just like what I've pointed out, if it is a commercial project, for example, it should generate some funds at the end of the project, or maybe you have developed something new, some innovative ideas. You need to patent that. So during that process, it means that data won't be accessible. So that data will be under an embargo. So be sure also of the contents of the RDM policy. Sometimes they say that the data can only be embargoed for a year. You can't go beyond that. But depending with the process of the patenting process, sometimes it might take longer, and then it also be prolonging the data sharing process. So be sure to articulate those issues within your DMP. I'm going to restrict data sharing for such a period to ensure that I will be able to complete the patenting process as a way of ensuring that no one will steal your innovation until the patent process is over. And then the issue of storage and backup, this one should also be well articulated within the DMP. Here we are looking at the two main concepts. How will the data be stored and backed up during the research, and how will you manage access and security as you be doing your research? The first one, we are saying that do you have sufficient storage, or will you include charges for additional services? Just like what I've pointed out, some researchers are dealing with big data, and sometimes the data repositories within the institution, it might have limited storage that is not able to deal with that storage. And there are some institutions with higher processing computers whereby those dealing with big data, their data will be stored there. So within your DMP, you should be able to include this information. I am going to deal with big data. Our data repository might not be able to handle such big data. As a result, I need some additional storage. If there are any charges that are needed, that should be included within the DMP so that it will also reflect within your budget to ensure that you'll be able to manage your research data throughout the research project. And then you should point out how will the data be backed up. Just like what I've pointed out, the example I've given of a PhD student who had collected the data, but before analysis, the machine was stolen. So here we are saying that as a researcher, you should be able to back up your data to ensure that even if your machine crashes or if your machine is stolen, you have another avenue of getting access to your research data so that it won't be a process of delaying your research process. So within your DMP, indicate how you are going to back up your data. Some, they said 3 backups are needed. 2 that are within the site and 1 should be off-site, especially if you are dealing with research that is very, very important or a big research. You should ensure that your data is backed up. Whether you are a student, you are doing your master's project, you are doing your PhD project, ensure that you back up your data. And as you are developing your DMP, indicate how you are going to back up your data. And then you also indicate who will be responsible for backup and recovery. In some cases, some principal investigators might not have the knowledge of backing up the data and also recovering the data when it is lost. So indicate within the DMP who is responsible. Do you have an IT person within the research project team, or you are banking with an IT person from the ICT department? You should indicate that. And then also indicate how will the data be recovered in the event of an incident. Just like what I pointed out, things happen. Your data is lost. How will you be able to recover it? Just because you have backups, you'll be able to recover it from the backups. So indicate how you are going to recover that data in the event that some eventualities happen. And then under how will you manage access and security, we are saying that you should indicate the risks to data security and how you will manage them. Taking, for example, the issue of unauthorized access. How are you going to deal with them? The issue of theft. How are you going to deal with them? Is the building secure where you are putting your research data? Is your machine secure? You should ensure that all those issues are dealt with within your DMP. And then how will you control access to keep the data secure? Here I've talked about the accessing to the building and accessing to the machine where the data is kept. And then how will you ensure that collaborators can access your data securely? Taking, for example, your research project team is composed of people that are outside your institution. Taking, for example, as Unisa researchers, you are doing a research with other researchers from VITS, from UCT, and others from outside the country. How will you ensure that the collaborators are accessing this data securely? What mechanism are you going to put in place? This should be available within your DMP. And then also indicate if creating or collecting data in the field, how will you ensure it's safe transfer into your main secured system? Taking, for example, you are going out to collect data, how will you ensure that it will be transferred into your secure system safely? All those issues should be pointed out within your DMP. And then on the issue of selection and preservation, you should look at which data are of long-term value and should be preserved, and then what is the long-term preservation plan for the data set. Remember here, you are also guided by the RDM policy that will tell you that here at Unisa, we preserve maybe research data sets for 10 years. That information should be available to you as you be developing your research data management plan. So here we are saying that what data must be retained, destroyed for contractual, legal, or regulatory purposes. One, if it is a grant from outside, ensure that you understand what the funder stipulates in terms of long-term preservation of the data. If it is an institutional grant, ensure that you understand what does the institution say in terms of preserving the data. And then also indicate how will you decide what other data to keep. And then what are the foreseeable research uses for the data? Is it reusable? Will other researchers be interested in this data? You should also think about those things as you be developing your research data management plan. And how long will the data be retained or preserved? This is mainly indicated in the RDM policy. So as a researcher, ensure that you are knowledgeable about this policy and how long the data will be retained, so that as you be developing your DMP, you indicate that this data set will be preserved for the next 10 years according to the RDM policy. And then under what is the long-term preservation plan for the data set, here we are looking at where or in which repository or archive will the data be held. Remember, I said each funder might have its own requirements in terms of data archiving. So as a researcher, know the requirements of the funder as you be developing your DMP and indicate that I'm going to deposit my data sets in this data repository. Sometimes the funder might have its own data repository, and then as part of meeting the funder requirements, they say you should deposit your data set within our own repository. As a researcher, you should comply to that. But if it is institutional funded, the institution, Unisa, have got a data repository that is available. If they say that you should deposit your data set within the institutional data repository, as a researcher, you should comply. And within the DMP, you indicate that I'm going to deposit my data set in the Unisa data repository. And then indicate what cost, if any, will your selected data repository or archive charge. In the event that you are not depositing your data set within the institutional repository, some data repositories might be charging for archiving. So you should ensure that you know how the data repository that you indicate operates, so that you include also the charge for the data repository within your budget. And then this, remember, this is just for planning purposes, so that you are able to know the processes that you'll be doing throughout the research process. And if you costed in time and effort to prepare the data for sharing and preservation, ensure that all those issues are within your DMP. And then the issue of data sharing. Remember, I pointed out that we are encouraging researchers to share their research data as a way of complying to the FAIR principles and also complying to the issues surrounding the integrity of research. In most cases, some might need to see the data set that have yielded the conclusion and the results of your research output, be it a journal article, be it a conference proceeding, or whatever publication that you are going to have at the end of your research project. So the issue of data sharing is critical and should be part of your DMP. And then there are two main concepts here that are coming to play. One, how will you share the data? And are there any restrictions on data sharing? On the first one, you should point out how potential users find out about your data. Remember, I said there are quite a number of data repositories that are available. And as a researcher, you should know where you archive your data set after the end of the project. Are you going to archive it in an institutional repository? Are you in the institutional data repository? Are you going to archive it in a repository that is pointed out by the funder? Are you going to archive it in other repositories? There are other repositories that are free. Taking, for example, there's Mendeley Data, there's Zonedo, there's quite a number of other institutions that archive research data. So here we are saying, how will potential users find out about your data? You should indicate that they will find this data, the data set of this research project in this research data repository. If it is Unisa data repository, you indicate. If it is another data repository, you indicate. And then with whom will you share the data and under what conditions? Is it going to be open access? Is it going to be accessible by anyone? You should indicate whom you are going to share the data with. And will you share data via a repository, hand or request directly, or use other mechanism? You should indicate within the DMP that I'm going to deposit my research data in this repository. And when will you make the data available? Is it soon after the end of the project, or it's going to be under an embargo? That should be available within the DMP. And will you pursue getting a persistent identifier for your data? Remember, I indicated that the use of persistent identifiers is important to ensure that your data set is uniquely identified, just like the DOI. The data sets, especially on Figshare, they are given a persistent identifier, and you'll be able to uniquely identify your data set with that persistent identifier. So you should indicate that you are going to use a persistent identifier to identify your data set. And then under restrictions, you should indicate what actions will you take to overcome or minimize restrictions. Remember, we said we are encouraging the sharing of research data. So we should be in a position to minimize restricting access to data sharing, especially if your research is not very, very sensitive, if you are not collecting sensitive data that cannot be shared. And then indicate for how long do you need exclusive use of the data and why. That should be available within your DMP. And will a data sharing agreement be required as you be sharing your data after the end of the project? And then another concept that you shouldn't ignore when you're developing your DMP is the issue of responsibilities and resources. Indicate who will be responsible for data management and what resources will you require to deliver your plan. Here we are saying that who is responsible for implementing the data management plan and who should ensure that it is reviewed and revised. It should be clear. Is it the principal investigator who should ensure that the DMP that has been developed is being implemented throughout the research life cycle? And is it being reviewed? Is it being revised? Because some things happen and you will need to update or review the DMP. It's important to do that. And within the data management plan, you should ensure that you point out who is responsible for implementing it. And then indicate who will be responsible for each data management activity. There are quite a number of activities that are being done within the data collection, analyzing, publishing, preservation processes. So the DMP should clearly state who is responsible for each data management activity. And then how will responsibilities be split across partner sites in collaborative research projects? Remember, I said that some projects will be done by researchers from different institutions. So how will you split responsibilities across the team? And then indicate how will data ownership and responsibilities for research data management be part of any consortium agreement or a contract agreed between partners. That should be clear within the DMP. And then in terms of resources, you should indicate whether additional specialist expertise is required when delivering your DMP, so that if need be, people will know that, oh, these people will need assistance in ABCD as they are delivering their data management plan. And then do you require hardware or software which is additional or exceptional to existing institutional provision? In some cases, we are saying that the institution might not have the infrastructure that you need as you be doing your research project. So when you indicate it within your DMP, you are giving room for those who should provide you with those resources to plan, so that as you be doing your research project, you'll be able to get all the necessary support as you be doing your research project, so that you will be able to efficiently do it. And then will charges be applied by data repositories? Remember, I said some data repositories, they charge for one to archive his or her data set. So will there be any additional charges into the data repositories where you are going to archive your research data? All that information should be available for planning purposes, so that everyone is prepared to ensure that your research process runs smoothly. So here I'll talk about the tips for writing a DMP. Remember, I said research data management starts with data management planning. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail, according to Franklin and Churchill. So here we are saying that always create a data management plan for the project. Whether you are doing a study, a master's study, you are doing a PhD, always prepare a data management plan. Whether you are a research team that is carrying out a research project, always create a data management plan that will assist you in organizing how you will be collecting your data and how you will archive the data at the end of the project. And then develop the data management plan as a team if you are working on a team project. Don't say that I'm the principal investigator, I will develop the DMP on my own. It will be difficult for other team members to come and be part of the plan that is already developed by others. So ensure that you develop the DMP as a team, so that you work together, everyone is aware of the DMP, and then you implement it. And then also use a template or a checklist to structure the plan. Remember, I pointed out that the three famous or most used tools that are available when developing data management plans. They are DMP Online by the Digital Creation Center, the DMP tool by the University of California, the South Africa DMP tool by Unisa. And then if you are working on a grant application, ensure that you look for the template that is recommended by the grant funder when developing the DMP. And then add as much detail as you can, so that you'll be able to implement the DMP, and then so that other researchers will be able to use your data set when you are not there after you publish it. when we are talking about the reusability of the research data. And then make sure sharing is central to the DMP. Your plan should zero on data sharing to ensure that you are able to enable access to the data set to other researchers who are not part of the research project. Remember, we are saying that within the open science environment, we are saying that open data, it allows other researchers to be able to access the data to avoid mainly duplication of research and to deal with the issues of research integrity, and also as a way of meeting funder requirements. And then also comply with research ethics and data protection. Remember, I said as you collect your data, you need consent forms. If you say within the consent form, we are going to archive the research data after the research project, ensure that you comply. If you tell the participants that this is just for academic purposes, we are not going to publish anything after this, comply with that as well. Ensure that you comply with the research ethics and data protection. And then also clarify intellectual property rights issues if there's collaboration. Taking, for example, you are collaborating with researchers from other institutions. They might have an RDM policy that is different from ours. So ensure that you clarify those issues before the beginning of the project to ensure that you know who owns the data, who archives the data, so as a way of ensuring that you clear all the copyright issues before you begin the research project. And then use the data management plan. Sometimes we have a weakness of just developing the plan, shove it somewhere, and then go into the field, start collecting the data, and then do as we wish. But as long as we have a data management plan, make sure that you utilize it, ensure that the team members know about this data management plan if it is a team project, and follow the plan. Don't just develop the plan and hide it somewhere. Even if you're a student, as you'll be doing your research, make sure that you follow the DMP. In some institutions, it's now mandatory for master's researchers and PhD students to submit a DMP when they are submitting their proposal. So in the event that they submit the DMP, the supervisor will be following and seeing whether the DMP is being followed. So when you develop one, make sure you utilize the data management plan. And then in conclusion, I can say that a DMP should be treated as a dynamic, evolving document to be updated as necessary throughout the project. Remember, I said you develop your DMP when you are starting, but throughout the research project, some things might crop up, things happen. You should be able to revise your DMP, add some things that need to be revised, and then ensure that you are changing accordingly throughout the research project. The document is dynamic. It's not casting stones. It changes, it evolves as the research project will be evolving. And as we'll be talking about developing our data management plans, our librarians can also guide us on best practices at Unisa when it comes to research data management and developing data management plans. So as researchers, let's make use of our librarians. Let's ask for guidance when we are not so sure, so that they assist us in terms of complying with the RDM policy, and then when we are developing our data management plans. With that, I thank you. Over to you, Doc Matija.